All right, we're live. Let's begin. We are recording this webinar on we're live streaming on Facebook and recording the webinar over here on Zoom. Good evening, I'm Ann Luther with the League of Women Voters of Maine. On behalf of the League, I'd like to welcome you along with our co-sponsors, the Ellsworth American, the Mount Desert Islander, the Weekly Packet, the Castine Patriot, and the Island Advantages. These great papers have joined the League in sponsoring this series of events. The League has been promoting voter participation for over 100 years. If you are interested in joining the League, we would welcome you as a member or volunteer. You can join at our website, lwvme.org. For our event tonight, participants on Zoom will be muted throughout and the chat will be turned off. Participants on Zoom can submit questions through the Q&A box. You'll find that at the bottom of your Zoom screen in the toolbar. Fair warning, we did receive a couple of questions in advance that we're probably not going to get to all the questions that were submitted tonight, but Chris will do his best to put the questions in the order of most general interest, Chris being our moderator. We will not be monitoring questions on Facebook. We do have somebody monitoring the Facebook comments, but only to make sure that we keep the conversation civil over there. If you're on the Facebook live stream and want to ask a question, it's not too late to join the Zoom webinar. Go to lwvme.org/events and register now to get a participant link. Once you have that, you can join this webinar immediately. The Facebook video will be available for later viewing on Facebook and through our online voter guide at vote411.org. The League of Women Voters of Maine posts recordings of these forums in order to inform voters. These recordings are unedited. Viewers may share or embed the complete video. However, no parties are authorized to download, edit, or distribute any part of this recording without written consent from the League of Women Voters of Maine. Excerpts, edited clips of the recordings may not be used for partisan, political, and/or campaign purposes, and we appreciate your cooperation in this. Now, let me introduce our moderator for tonight, Chris Crockett. Chris is the publisher of Mainstay Media, which includes the Ellsworth American, the Mount Desert Islander, and several other Maine weekly newspapers. He's the outgoing president of the Maine Press Association, and we're very pleased to have Chris helping us out tonight. Here's Chris. I'll see you back here at the end.
Thank you, Ann, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this and many of the other candidate forums. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. As Ann said, my name is Chris Crockett. I'm the publisher of the Ellsworth American, the Mount Desert Islander, as well as a handful of other weekly newspapers along the coast. With us tonight are the candidates for House District 12, which includes Franklin, Gouldsboro, Hancock, Sorrento, Sullivan, and Winter Harbor. On November's ballot is Billy Bob Falkenham, the Republican incumbent candidate from Winter Harbor, and Roy Gott, the independent candidate from Franklin. First, let me introduce Billy Bob Falkenham. Billy Bob is the current state representative from Winter Harbor. He is married to Carrie and has 3 children, Robin, Carter, and Harper. Billy Bob is a commercial fisherman. He has passed many bills in the legislature, including being the first legislature in Maine history to pass a bill that added an article to the Declaration of Rights in the Maine Constitution. Next, we have Roy Gott. Roy is a lifelong Franklin resident and Sumner Memorial High School and University of Maine graduate. He is the IT manager for the Schoodic Institute and owns and operates Charybdis Computer Services and chairs the RSU 24 school board. The rules for tonight are as follows. Each candidate will have 3 minutes to give an opening statement and 2 minutes at the end of the night for a closing statement. The candidates will be asked 3 questions that they have received in advance of tonight's forum and be given 3 minutes to answer. I will switch between candidates as the questions are asked, giving each an opportunity to answer a question first. Audience members are invited to submit questions via the Q&A feature here on Zoom, and only questions submitted using that feature will be seen by me. Questions will be selected by me and may be reworded. Candidates will have 2 minutes to answer questions submitted by our audience. We've received many questions via email from our constituents ahead of tonight's forum. Some questions submitted might be directed at a single candidate, but both will have an opportunity to respond. With all of that said, let's get started. First up, Billy Bob, your opening remarks.
Good evening, Chris, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. I am Billy Bob Falkenham. I am a lobster fisherman from Winter Harbor. I've been fishing almost my entire life. One of my earliest memories was being on a lobster boat with my father when I was 3 years old. He used to pile up life jackets that I could sleep on. That's what I've been doing my whole entire life. And I think that it is very important right now that my voice is down in Augusta, supporting the lobster industry. It's a much needed voice right now with what's facing our industry. Everybody knows what's going on in the news and the current times around that. I am a federal Area 1 lobster fisherman. I am the only federal Area 1 lobster fisherman licensed to fish that is in the legislature. So it's very important that I am down there fighting for the industry, and without it, the entire state of Maine economy will collapse if these regulations and stuff go through. So I am a very effective legislator in Augusta. I've in the minority party, but I've managed to get many, many bills passed. And the bills I've got passed aren't just, tiny little bills naming bridges and stuff like that. As you mentioned, I was the first legislator in state history to amend the Constitution to add a Declaration of Rights. That was the right to food that we passed by 61% last November. I also passed a bill against civil asset forfeiture, which was sort of a first in the nation bill. It made Maine the 4th state in the country to ban civil asset forfeiture. But we went one step further and prohibited the federal asset sharing program. So that was a huge win for civil liberties, not just in Maine, but that echoed throughout the country. And that's an effort that's spreading there as well. I was successful in passing 2 bills that came from constituents. One bill was from the police chief right here in town, Danny Mitchell. He came to me with an idea that he had, a concern about people without insurance being on our roads, and we put that bill in and got it passed. I had another constituent, Danny Rogers, who came to me with an issue about his business that had to involve lobstering and doing tours. We put a bill in and we got that bill passed. I support our school teachers. I had an art teacher, Mary Lou Weaver.
We're just about out of time, Billy Bob.
Okay, my timer must not be working. Anyways, I was the one that successfully passed the bill that increased retired teachers' health insurance from 45% to 55%. And I am the only Republican in the state that has been endorsed by the Maine Education Association. And
Okay,
I
yep,
am
I
the
think
moderate
I have to
candidate.
stop you right there. Sorry. All right, thank you.
We'll have more time.
We will. We'll have plenty more time tonight. Thank you, Billy Bob. Roy, your opening remarks.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for coordinating this event. Let me just start with saying I've truly enjoyed my last 10 years of service on the RSU 24 board, and it's really because of that service that I considered running for the state legislature in the past and did so this year. I really do mean it when I say I try to come to the table without any specific agenda. My interest is always to do what is best for the people I'm there to represent the interests of. So when it's on the board of RSU 24, it's to try and do the most good or the least harm for students in whatever action we take. And that's important to me. And that's one of the things I want to bring with me to Augusta. I work with a range of individuals, a range of opinions. We don't always agree on what the best thing is, and that's fine. That's part of the process. And as long as we treat each other with respect, we can always work toward finding a common ground and build solutions that, regardless of party affiliation, move things forward. Over the course of the summer, I've been talking with a lot of people, meeting our communities, and hearing what their concerns are. While there's a lot of national level concerns out there, that's really outside of the reach of the legislature. There's a lot of practical concerns that are more locally based, and I know we're going to be talking about a lot of those issues tonight. So I won't go into that just yet. One thing I tell people is I don't make promises when I don't know that I can deliver. And, this will be my first foray into the legislature if I'm elected. And so I'm new. As such, I don't know all the ropes on how all of the processes work. It will be entirely new experience. And the only promise that I've made to people in light of that is that I will do my absolute best to be as impactful as possible for the people of the House District 12 and the state as a whole. Some of my big priorities are strengthening our regulatory bodies so that things like the proposed salmon farm, American aquaculture, is held up to the appropriate level of scrutiny when it comes down to time to approve or deny. State waters, it shouldn't be up to local communities, individual towns to have to fight that fight on their own. Education is, of course, an important topic for me, and I think we need to continue our support for education. The state recently got to its 55% commitment to funding education. I think that's excellent. We need to keep that up. But we also need to look at ways to improve what we're doing in education. So expanding career and technical education and making sure our funding processes are fair to the towns that are supporting these schools. And of course, technology is important to me, so I do want to continue to see work on expanding broadband access across the state. So Maine grants a lot of people a wonderful life here. I want to be a part of helping it stay that way and get even better. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to our first questions of the night, which the candidates have received in advance. I'll start with you, Billy Bob. What are the impacts of changing climate on District 12, and how can it be addressed by the legislature?
Thank you, Chris, for that question. I actually didn't see that question before this, so I'm just going to kind of run with it. So the climate has, especially the Gulf of Maine, has been warming for a while now. As a matter of fact, I've participated in some of those studies when I've worked for the state doing a lobster survey, and part of that was to take temperature probes out there. And I've seen this warming trend in the Gulf of Maine, and I've seen shifting patterns of fish moving in where we didn't historically see them in the past. And it's also one of the theories is that the reason why we've had this big boom of lobsters that we've had over the last decade has been because of the warming water. Now, what that means in the future, we're not quite sure of, but if it warms up too much, it's possible that the waters could warm up too much to make this a bountiful place for lobsters, which obviously wouldn't be good for me, because that's what I depend on. But my concern with the legislature is when agendas move past what's realistic for the people of Maine, and the goal towards, carbon neutrality. I think Maine is already carbon neutral. We have over 90% forested, so we're already sequestering a lot of carbon. We don't really have a big footprint, and a lot of the policies that I've seen proposed from the legislature have been will be bad for Mainers. because Maine is 80% dependent on oil, and we can't just put in bills that are going to punish people on oil. It's not going to switch over like that. I think that it's important that we use renewable energy sources such as hydro. I'm a big proponent of hydro. Right now, Maine has a really wacky law in place where hydro is considered green up to 99 megawatts, but when it hits 100 megawatts, all of a sudden it's not considered green anymore. This is foolish. We all know that hydro is green, renewable energy with a never-ending supply of water to supply it. Literally, the battery for hydropower is the water. So we don't need to clog our fields up with endless solar panels or put windmills in the ocean. We can use good, clean, carbon-free hydropower. And that right there would be, that's one of my top priorities, as a matter of fact, is moving that bill through the legislature.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to you, Roy. Same question. What are the impacts of the changing climate in District 12, and how can they be addressed by the legislature?
Thank you. So just to save a little time, Billy Bob made a lot of great, accurate statements there. And climate change is real. And the reality is that it's not a problem that Maine alone can solve. And even if we did everything we possibly could, no matter how extreme, we're a small part of one nation and a global greenhouse gas emissions problem. And in all likelihood, it's probably going to continue to get worse instead of better. With the warming of the Gulf of Maine, it really is a matter of time until we see really substantive changes in what the bounty of the Gulf will be. And that's going to disrupt fisheries, as Billy Bob said, as you know, if lobster move north chasing colder waters, and it's going to increase predation from invasive species like the green crab that's moving in and has decimated clam populations. So that's going to have a tremendous effect as time goes on, and we certainly want to do everything we can to prevent exacerbating that problem. We're also seeing more extreme weather events that are causing strain on infrastructure, washing out bridges and roads, requiring us to rebuild continually. And sea level rise may not be the worst part of it, but that's encroaching on buildings and properties and infrastructure already in place. So knowing how little we can do, I think it's logical to say we should do as many of the things as possible that are reasonable to do but these are going to be mitigations and largely adaptation strategies. So the culvert that washed out in Birch Harbor when we had that freak rainstorm, maybe the state needs to start looking at ways to make its infrastructure more resilient to these types of events and adjust their construction strategies. If we're looking at the warming trend of the Gulf of Maine, maybe we need to be looking at ways to capitalize on changes that are going to happen, new species that might move into the area to mitigate the loss of fisheries that we may lose. And absolutely, we need to do what we can to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, but it's not going to be an on and off switch. We're always going to need oil or gas to some extent. But we can do what is reasonably possible with green energy, whether it's hydro, whether it's wind, whether it's solar or other sources. But we need to do it in responsible ways that don't unduly impact livelihoods and doesn't just shift the burden on the environment from one aspect to another, destroying one aspect to be green. And we are going to have to work on our electrical grid if we're going to even move towards electrification of transportation and improving the housing sector with things like heat pumps. So go there.
Great, thank you. And we'll stay with you, Roy, for the next question to start. What are the major economic problems in District 12, and how do you propose addressing them locally and in the legislature?
So the single biggest concern I heard when visiting this summer was the lack of affordable housing or housing in general. And I know within RSU 24, we've lost really good candidates because they haven't been able to find places to live. Some of our administrators that we hired this year are commuting greater than 2 hours each way. So we need to do more as a state to spur investment in the construction of long-term housing that will help us to fill those positions that, by virtue of their remaining empty, are actually hampering our economy. And whether that means public-private partnerships or the state figuring out a way to work with municipalities to identify needs and help to address them, we really need to focus on that. We should take the opportunity also, while we're at it, to ensure that new development in housing is energy efficient to help combat climate change and ensure lasting affordability. Still on housing, we need to keep working on property tax. The cap that was passed last session for senior homesteaders is a good step, but the lion's share of municipal budgets go to support schools, and the state funding formula uses valuation, the state's valuation, as a metric of a town's ability to pay. And that valuation is informed by real estate prices. Coastal towns have seen runaway real estate price increase, and there's been no commensurate increase in property tax collected to really mitigate any losses in subsidy they may have received. So I know it's a perennially discussed topic, but I think it's time for a hard look at measures of ability to pay when it comes to education, so we can help keep property taxes in the realm of reality. While businesses across the board need employees, tradespeople are still in very high demand. So we need to maintain and enhance supportive career and technical education to broaden the pipeline for students who want to go into those types of careers instead of pursuing a college degree. And I think that'll require DOE to rethink certification of CTE teachers and how it funds CTE, broadening and expanding it in schools. And that's something it ought to do to be responsive, not just to the needs of society right now and the jobs we have available, but the people that really want to pursue careers. And it's just a good, honest job. And there should never be a stigma, if there ever was, associated with going into the trades. It's obvious we need them now more than ever. And then, as I mentioned earlier, broadband expansion. There's a lot of businesses that cannot survive without real broadband internet. And if we continue to expand and push that out to more communities, businesses that need it will be able to come to places outside of the likes of Bangor, Portland, and even Ellsworth to get to the more rural areas where it might help to have some new businesses around.
Thank you. Over to you, Billy Bob. Same question. What are the major economic problems in District 12, and how do you propose addressing them locally and in the legislature?
Thank you. On this question, I might suggest not what the economic problems are, but what the potential economic problems may be. And that would be the collapse of the lobster industry. If something like that happened, the lobster industry not only supports thousands of direct jobs like mine, and I have 2 crew members, so that's 3 guys right there that work on one boat directly, but we also have our dock workers, and that goes to trap shops. I know the trap shop in Ellsworth. I was just up there the other day to Down East Fishing Gear, and was talking to the gentleman that was bringing some buoys out for me, and I noticed he kind of seemed like he was a little bit upset, and I asked him about it, probed him about it, and he said that it was his last day. He'd just got laid off. And that's because we're seeing an economic decline already from the potential of what's happening to the lobster industry, as well as things like the red list and the fact that we're experiencing a really low price year. All the guys, I guess, apparently all the fishermen have canceled their trap orders. They're not buying traps. So they've laid off a whole entire crew of workers up there. And this is going on throughout, other sectors that are affected by the amount of money that comes in through the lobster industry. So if this persists with the whole, canceling red listing of the lobster industry, and if we don't beat back these whale rules, you're going to see a lot of economic hardship in down East Maine. And I want to be there in the legislature to do everything I can to work against that and combat that from happening. Besides that, in general, I think that you need to incentivize working. I'm always a big proponent for reducing or eliminating the income tax. I think that nothing incentivizes someone to work more than being able to keep their own money. It seems like a pretty obvious principle to me that if you work for it and earn it, that it's yours, and that you should be able to maintain as much of it as possible. And so that's something that I'd love to see happen in the next legislature. I always vote for that bill when it comes up to eliminate the income tax or reduce it. So those are the types of things that I'm in favor of.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to stick with you for the next question to begin. What are the challenges for healthcare in District 12, including mental and behavioral health, and how should the legislature address them?
Okay, so I tell you, one of the biggest problems from healthcare, I just had a constituent talk to me about this the other day, and this is something that I plan on looking into and seeing how we can address it. But we live in a rural area, and our veterans are too far away from VA facilities to get care. Now, they're supposed to be able to, because of laws that had been passed, they're supposed to be able to get care locally and not have to worry about paying it, because the government's supposed to pay for those veterans' health care. But what happens is they still send those veterans bills, and they'll have to either end up paying them or fighting it themselves to have a resolution. And that's not really the way that it's supposed to work. They're supposed to be able to, if they live outside of 50 miles from a VA facility, they're supposed to be able to get care at their local facility and have it taken care of. And I know personally a veteran that I spoke with recently, and I've heard of others as well, that this system isn't working out for them. They're having trouble. They're getting billed for those. That's something that I think we could take a look at in the legislature and address. So that would really be a focus of mine that I'd work on.
Thank you. Roy, on to you, same question. What are the challenges for healthcare in District 12, including mental and behavioral health, and how should the legislature address them?
So the biggest obstacle to people getting the health care they need in this district is really availability and access. You know, we've had a lot of instability in the healthcare provider arena, and that's led to a lack of consistency. There's a shortage of practitioners, and the places that people can get healthcare are often far away, relatively speaking. And many seeking mental or behavioral health services have to travel to Bangor, which certainly better than having to travel to Augusta, but that's still, you know, about an hour or more from most of our district. You know, despite best efforts, some among us are still without insurance coverage to adequately pay for services, and those who can afford it may not have transportation to get where they need to be. Emergency rooms end up becoming surrogates for primary care. And, you know, there may be scenarios where service is available, but a shortage of case managers, especially, you know, in the mental and behavioral areas, that can prevent people from being able to take full advantage of them. In the short term, we could look at legislation to create incentives to broaden the pipeline for healthcare workers at all levels, whether it's a 4-year or more college or community college. Even adult education programs have roles to play in filling the shortage here. But to be sustainable in the long term, these people have to be paid commensurate with the services they render. They are professionals, and they're, you know, right now, some of them are making minimum wage doing these jobs, and it's a high value skilled labor. So, you know, we need to look at the compensation rates through Maine Care as one example. And again, here, it ties in with what I was talking about with housing. If you don't have housing available, it's hard to attract more people to the area. And on the other hand, insecurity with housing, among other basic needs, contributes to decline in mental health state for people. So, it's hitting us twice there. And so improving the supply of available housing would really contribute to lessening the need for as much care as we have. And certainly, the concerns that veterans have with the billing for services, as Billy Bob mentioned, that they're entitled to seek elsewhere other than a VA hospital. Those would be good to pursue as well. I'd like to see that happen. So, thank you.
Thank you. And now we're going to move on to the questions that have been submitted by our audience. Just a reminder, for these audience submitted questions, you'll have 2 minutes to answer. And we'll stay with you, Roy, to start. The first question we have for tonight is, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs case, returning the abortion issue to the states. Would you support changing Maine's abortion laws?
So I think the abortion laws, as far as access to abortions, are right about where they need to be. I don't think I would want to see any changes on that front. I do believe there's the possibility we should look at protections for Maine providers to ensure that if people need to come to Maine from away to receive treatment, that those providers are protected, and potentially even those people who are in need of those services are protected from prosecution as well. It's a thorny subject, but I don't want our providers to become targets simply by doing their jobs in the state of Maine. And I saw another candidate reference this as well, and I think it's related, but it's not directly. We need to improve access, because there are really only two fully certified and qualified places to get the full breadth of reproductive care, and that's in Bangor and Portland, I believe. So more access, or improvement to access.
Great, thank you. Same question to you, Billy Bob. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in the Dobbs case, returning the abortion issue to the states. Would you support changing Maine's abortion law?
Yeah, this is obviously a hot issue, and definitely a liberal talking point. So I knew this question would come up. Right now, Maine has very good abortion restrictions on late-term abortions. I support Maine's current law, and I would not change Maine's current law. But I would say that in my first term in the legislature, bill was passed that funded elective abortions. That was that polls 75% of the public opposes taxpayer funded elective abortions. I would definitely vote for a bill that removed taxpayer funding of elective abortions. Of course, the Hyde Amendment is still in place, that Medicare pays for abortions in the case of rape, incest, and the health of the mother. I would always support that. But I do not support taxpayer funded elective abortions. And I do support the current restrictions that Maine has on abortions. And that's why when I was surveyed on that question, I said that I do support restrictions on abortions. And I did notice that my opponent said that he didn't support restrictions on abortions.
All right, thank you. Next question, we're going to stick with you, Billy Bob. And we've talked a little bit about this tonight, but I'll ask the question anyways. The lobster industry is facing further regulation to protect right whales. What should the state legislature's role be in the regulatory process and in the courts?
Yeah, good person for that question. I actually funded the bill in the last legislature, LD 1916, which was a legal defense fund for the lobster industry. I worked very hard to get that bill passed. Obviously, doesn't need to be stated again, but I'm a Republican and in the minority. The Democrats control the governor, the Senate, and the House. And I was successful in getting that bill passed. What that bill did was it funded the legal funds of the two groups that are mounting lawsuits against the federal government, the MLA and the Maine Lobster Union. I'm a member of both of those. And what the state needs to do that it hasn't done so far is it needs to step up in the fight against these regulations. And the state can't just sit back and be an intervener on these lawsuits like it has been in the past. The state needs to be the plaintiff in the lawsuits. And that's why I'm hoping for a change in leadership in Augusta, because we need to stop playing second fiddle and just being intervener in these lawsuits. And we need to sue the federal government, much like West Virginia did in their case where they sued the EPA and won that lawsuit. The state of Maine needs to step up and be the lead plaintiff and sue the federal government, because this is major overreach. This is bureaucracy that is overstepping its bounds with these rules. And yeah, that's what we need to do. We need to fight.
Thank you. Roy, same question to you. The lobster industry is facing further regulation to protect right whales. What should the state legislature role be in the regulatory process and in the courts?
It's honestly going to sound like a little bit of a cop-out, but Mr. Falkenham has the experience in this area. He is the lobster fisherman, and there's very little that I could add to what he has just said. It is something that is in the case. It's in the hands of the federal government and the courts, and outside of, as he said, taking the federal government to court and advocacy and just working at every level possible to change the regulations and prohibit future onerous restrictions on the industry. There's really not much else that can be done legislatively from the state of Maine. And absolutely no one here wants to see right whales go extinct. And what I've said to many people when asked about this, we're not opposed to, I think most people are not opposed to making changes if there's a reasonable hope that they're actually going to have an effect. But that does not seem to be where these regulations have gone, and they need to be fought. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you. And I'll stay with you for the next question. How do you feel the COVID-19 pandemic was handled at the local and state level?
That is a really, that was a thorny subject depending on what side you sat on. And certainly from the position of the school board, I can tell you there's nobody among this board that wanted to, at least in RSU 24, wanted to impose the restrictions that we ended up doing. We still don't know everything there is to know about COVID. I voted, just to get it out there, I voted to not have fall sports for one season at Sumner. I voted once to not have winter sports, but I did change my vote to allow winter sports at the end. I voted twice to keep masks optional before massive outbreaks and teacher infections and absences caused us to require to put on masks to be able to keep the schools open. Certainly at the local level, we did the best we could to keep students in the educational setting that was most beneficial for them. At the state level, it's a lot easier to judge in hindsight, to say there are things we could have done better, things we could have done differently. But we were dealing with a disease the likes of which we hadn't seen in 100 years, and we're still dealing with the after effects. People with long COVID are suffering, and we still don't know what the end result and the end costs will be. So I think I would rather err on the side of caution and protecting than to just I would rather do that than be accused of being callous with lives. So could it have been done better in certain circumstances? I'm sure it could have with what we know now. And, but we didn't have the benefit of that knowledge then. And so in the absence of perfect knowledge, I would have to say, I would see us do the same.
Okay, thank you. Same question to you, Billy Bob. How do you feel the COVID-19 pandemic was handled at the local and state level?
Absolutely atrocious. 2 weeks to flatten the curve turned into what we're still dealing with 2.5 years of this stuff. And everybody, I feel like just about everybody was on board with at the very beginning, being cautious, figuring out what to do, navigating our ways through that. So it was perfectly acceptable to be overcautious in the beginning, but as we've moved on, there's been very little apologizing for wrong decisions or any sort of sympathy for any of the stuff that was done. I have friends that have moved out of state because their businesses were crushed by the restrictions put on by the state. I had a very dear friend of mine who was a disabled Army veteran who had a coffee shop, and she, because of her disability, couldn't wear a mask. She worked by herself behind a 6-foot-high plexiglass barrier, handing coffee through a small hole in the counter. And she was back there by herself. And the CDC came in and told her she couldn't enter her own business. That's unacceptable. There's been no apologies. There's been no making up for this in any way. What we did to the children was absolutely atrocious, and the results are showing that learning has been hurt by it. Reading is down, math is down. The remote learning was an absolute abject failure. The lack of sports and activities that children had to do, all things that, should at least be apologized for.
Thank you. And I'm going to stick with you, Billy Bob. I have a question that was submitted specifically for you. So the question is, some community members have raised concerns about your participation at a recent event at John Linehan's Constitution Hall, organized by the Walkaway Pack. Can you explain what your role was there and why you chose to participate?
Oh, wow. This is pretty unbelievable that I'm getting a question in a debate about my First Amendment ability to freely, associate. Absolutely ridiculous that this question would get pulled, I think. I mean, that's really, I'm going to say that that's a low one on the League of Women Voters for letting that question come in. But yeah, I guess to explain that, if it needs to be explained, I was invited to come to the Constitution Hall and speak about the lobster industry, something I'm very passionate about. I was asked by a friend of mine to come to that, and I accepted. And I went there. I was greeted by very kind people. And I told them what was going on with the lobster industry. And that was about all there is to that. I don't know why that would be questioned, or how exactly did you phrase? Let me ask, how did you phrase that? Why is that concerning that I went to Ellsworth to talk about the lobster industry? What is concerning about that?
All I have is some community members raised concerns about your participation at a recent event at John Linehan's Constitution Hall, organized by the Walkaway Pack. And the question is, can you explain your role there and why you chose to participate?
Yeah, okay. I don't even know what the walkaway pack is. Did you research that to make sure that, did you even fact check that before you asked that?
Yep, that was what was advertised in the newspaper for that event.
Okay. I don't know what the walkaway pack is, but I was invited to Constitution Hall to talk about the lobster industry, and that's what I did.
Great, thank you. Roy, that question wasn't really directed at you, but do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I understand why some people would have some concerns. There have been some controversial, I would say, some extremist positions advocated at Constitution Hall, but I would say, knowing what Billy Bob was there to do, I would encourage people to take a look at why he was there, what the purpose of his visit was, and reserve their judgment, even though other stuff goes on there, not to paint him ill just because of other things that have happened at that location.
Thank you. And I do have a question for you, Roy, that was directed at you specifically. Many parents are rightly concerned about the postponed opening of the new Sumner Memorial High. What, if anything, could have been done differently to prevent the delay?
So that's a wonderful question. And there's a lot of, we're going to get into the finger pointing part of the building project a little later. We want to get into the building first, but there are things I feel that could have been done by different aspects of the chain in the building project, whether it's at the architect's level. Concerns were raised by fire departments that there was inadequate water supply at fire hydrants in the beginning that could have been further investigated. Long Pond Water District, I don't know why it took them as long as it did to come to the realization that they were not able to supply water that would meet the needs of the building. There are certainly, that would have really shortened the delay there. So, those are things that, due to the structure of school boards, how we operate, how the building process operates, and how information filters through, these are things that, we were assured were certainly under control. And could we have asked more and more insistently, are you sure? Are you sure? I'm sure we probably could have done that, but that's why you employ professionals, because theoretically they know what they're doing. So there's blame to go around. And but aside from just the water supply issues, the building project is delayed due to supply chain issues and delays due to COVID. So we still suffer from issues with that, regardless of the water supply issue. And unfortunately, those are a little bit out of our control entirely. So.
Thank you. Billy Bob, that question was directed at Roy, but your thoughts on the delayed Sumner High School?
Yeah, sure. The finger pointing certainly has gone around, and there was some of the finger pointing just done right there. School board's pointing the finger at the fire marshal's pointing the finger at the engineer, and everybody's in a big circle pointing their finger at each other. But regardless, it was the whole decision to move out of the old school before the new one was turnkey ready was a bad decision. And the kids in six through 8 had good grammar schools that they were in doing just fine. And the kids in the high school were in a high school that had been there for 70 years and were doing just fine. And they should have remained that way until the new school was ready. And then even if they needed to take a week vacation in between moves to get the teachers to move over, they should have done that. But it's completely unacceptable that we're into now, these kids are doing their 3rd year of modified learning and they're doing Zoom. Is it's no wonder the parents are so angry with this, what's going on in this school system, that they've got kids in the 3rd school year now doing Zoom learning, which we all know is an absolute failure, and it shouldn't have happened.
Thank you. And I'll stick with you for the next question. Do you support a bill ending the sale of flavored tobacco products?
No, absolutely not. Well, first of all, just the way you worded that is, it makes it sound like it's tobacco, and these things are a smoking cessation product. There have been thousands of people across the country that have given up smoking because of these products, and that's what they were designed to do. It's a smoking cessation product. I know how hard it is to quit smoking. I quit smoking about 12 years ago, and I had part of that was an e-cigarette back then for a little bit. In my case, it didn't, wasn't the whole way, but that's getting off the subject. But no, I wouldn't ban a product that gets people to stop smoking and filling their lungs with cancerous cigarette smoke. That's ridiculous. If someone can use something like that to get themselves to stop smoking cigarettes, then I think it's great.
Thank you. Same question to you, Roy. Do you support a bill ending the sale of flavored tobacco products?
So my gut reaction as somebody who lived with smokers pretty much all of my formative years, and I'm not in support of any sort of tobacco product, but somebody did make the point that, well, even just now, not just for smoking cessation, but there are other things that vaping products are used for that actually have legitimate medicinal or practical purposes. Now, does the fact that there's a legitimate medical and other use for these devices outweigh the tremendous impact they've had for children who have taken it up because it's trendy and cool and they like the flavors? That's an important question. So I'm not saying 100% I would support a ban. I would lean that direction, but I would want to find ways to reduce availability to those who are specifically in need of it. And certainly we need to look at the marketing aspects of them because that marketing has historically been done in ways to make them very attractive to young individuals. And so I'm not in support of tobacco industry in general. I'm not in support of those products, but like anything that has a potential good use, I'm interested in seeing how we can find a middle ground.
Thank you, and I'll stick with you, Roy. I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 more questions before we get to the closing statements. First up, explain why you are or are not a clean elections candidate.
I am a clean elections candidate, specifically because one of the things I really believe in is an even playing field for all political races. And I think that, I didn't even know the clean elections model really. I'd heard the term, but I didn't even know what it was until I really started looking into running this year. And I had been talking for years about finding ways to put everybody on a level playing field to really enhance the security and the faithfulness and the honesty in elections. We talk a lot about election integrity, and to me, keeping big money out of it, even big money at a small local level, that's one way to do it. And so that was important for me to run as a clean elections candidate.
Thank you. Same question to you, Billy Bob. Explain why you are or are not a clean elections candidate.
Yes, I'm a traditional candidate. Clean elections needs to be completely overhauled. what was just said about big money and that it keeping big money out is false. The donation limit for Maine campaign for House and Senate campaigns is $425. That's not big money. That's little money. And we've got people that are struggling to fill their oil tanks, seniors and people on fixed income that are going to have trouble filling up their first oil barrel, let alone keeping themselves going through the winter. And these clean elections candidates get $18,000 in taxpayer money that comes from the taxpayers to fund the signs that people like to steal off the side of the road, the junk mail that comes in our mailboxes this time of year and all that. And I think that money could be better spent helping people than spent on campaigns. Now I fund mine what's called traditional, which for the most part means people in my church, people in my community, my family have supported me. You know, I get donations from my mom, my dad, my aunts and uncles, a lot of people at my church. And that's where most of my money comes from. You can, you know, look at my reports and see that almost all of my money comes locally. There's even a breakdown by towns. So that's what you do when you're running for office like this. You go get people that support you to give you money. And the whole clean elections setup, it was a much smaller amount of money. It was overhauled so that it's now, you know, a big amount of money. It used to be $6,000 and it would help people that, you know, had trouble getting into it. But now it's turned into this just absolute boondoggle. The state of Maine spends millions of dollars on these campaigns every year. The candidates go out there and ask for $5. And if they get enough people to give them $5, then all of a sudden they get $18,000. I'd give just about anybody $5, but the part that when the people give $5, they think that they're just donating $5 to a campaign, but what they're doing is they're really extracting for every $5 donation, they're taking about $100 from the taxpayers of Maine. And I think that money could be way better spent helping people.
Thank you. And I'll stay with you for what should be our last question of the night before we move into the closing statements. Will you accept the results of any election whose results have been certified by the Maine Secretary of State?
Easy question, easy answer. Yes.
I was ending it easy. Roy, same question to you. Will you accept the results of any election whose results have been certified or confirmed by the Maine Secretary of State?
Yes, I will.
Great. Thank you. And thank you both for participating tonight. I'm going to start with you, Billy Bob, for your closing statement.
Thank you. Thank you for having this debate. This has been fun as usual. Yeah, I would just like to tell the people out there that I am the moderate candidate. A little bit of history about myself. I'm actually in my third political party. I started off as a Democrat. I progressed over here to a Republican. I'm a very moderate person, as evident by how much I got done in Augusta. I worked with both parties many times to get things done down there. I was successful in doing the impossible with right to food, which added a Declaration of Rights to our state constitution. I worked with Senate President Troy Jackson to get the legal defense fund for the lobster industry passed. I have passed, as I said before, protections against civil asset forfeiture, which means that no longer can people have their property taken without justice, without going through the court systems. I've passed a bill to make our roads safer, LD 1011, an act to include excluded individuals on insurance cards. I passed a bill to give lobster fishermen more opportunities with an act to allow commercial lobster license holders to possess marine harvesting demonstration license. And I'm just a person that is going to represent everybody. I'm endorsed by the Maine Education Association, the Wabanaki Alliance, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, the Maine Realtors Association. And I have, after 2 terms, I have a lot of knowledge of how things work down there in Augusta, and I love representing my people, and I look forward to continuing my work for the people of this district.
Thank you. Roy, your closing statement?
So, I want to thank again the league and the sponsors of this event. I want to thank you, Chris, for moderating, and Mr. Falkenham for joining us tonight, and for your service in your 2 terms in the legislature. I do appreciate that. I want to thank the people who joined us tonight on Zoom and on Facebook, who wanted to tune in and learn more about us as candidates, because it's important that people engage in the political process. I don't have a list of bills to give as accomplishments. As I said, I'd be new and I wouldn't have that experience, but I do have a desire, regardless of the outcome, to work with whoever prevails, or if I prevail, whoever, work with you, Billy Bob, to try and make sure that we can all get good solutions out of Augusta, no matter who is there. And so I would love that opportunity to grow my service to our communities by serving as the next representative in Augusta, and technically the first one for the new House District 12. And I would appreciate people, their thoughtful consideration for me as their candidate on November 8th. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy, and thank you both for joining us tonight. I'm going to give it back to Ann.
Thank you, Chris, for so ably moderating the forum tonight. Thank you to both the candidates, both for your willingness to run and serve. It's public service that you do, and we are all very appreciative of your willingness to do it. And for joining us tonight, I think voters learned a lot about you both, and that's what we're here for. So thanks again. Forums continue tomorrow, Thursday night. Check out the league's website, lwvme.org, for the schedule tomorrow and Thursday. We'll see you then.